Yeah, so thank you. I was extremely excited when I learned that this class was happening at all, just because I've been doing things that I would consider audio AR for 12 years now, probably. I'm very old, so don't ask me any particulars. But it's so exciting to be at a time now where things are becoming, I don't know if I'd call it mainstream yet, but at least getting to the point where people are talking about it and teaching it, so I was excited to learn from what you guys are going through in learning in this class, and to contribute to the extent that I can. So I don't know what just happened there, but I'm going to press play again on my back. I'm a sound artist and technologist, and I've been doing work with what I would call audio AR for quite a while. As I was saying, I work a lot with spoken human voices, and the contributory part of my work is that I generally do work that feeds off of responses and commentary that I get from people who are experiencing the work. So I ask people questions, I record their answers, or they record themselves, and then those sort of feed back into these evolving works that are often location-based and sort of change over time, and often have a musical underpinning as well. So I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of examples of my work, and then talk a little bit about the technology that I've developed to support some of that work, which is what I would call a contributory audio AR framework platform called Roundware. And then I'm hoping there'll be plenty of time to ask questions, because that's probably going to be the most useful and interesting part, perhaps. So feel free to jump in any time if you have questions, but there will be time at the end either way. So let me just leap in. I don't know what order things are going to happen here, but I'm going to go for it, whatever it is. Okay, so what is Ramware? I just mentioned a little bit about what Ramware is, but essentially Ramware is a framework or a platform, depending on your preference there, that allows for the creation of, basically it allows to overlay any kind of physical landscape with a layer of audio. And it's actually multiple layers of audio that can interact with each other. And I have this quick sort of example here of the basic elements of what a Ramware installation covers. So let's say you wanted to do something on the mall in DC, and this is the mall. And the first thing Ramware allows you to do is create sort of regions of what I call ambient music. Well, I don't call it, I mean, lots of people call things ambient music, but it's sort of a continuous layer of ambient sound. And those, right now, they're just circles that are drawn here. You could have any shapes you want. And basically, the way to think about it is each of these circles has a different underlying ambient, it doesn't have to be ambient, but often in my case it's ambient soundtrack. And as you walk from one to the next, one fades out, the other one fades in, et cetera. Here you've got all three of them playing. So this is a way to compose a piece of music or a audio experience of some sort that really is very highly dependent on how somebody traverses an actual terrain. So this is quite simplified in the sense that there are only circles here right now. Roundware started out, you could only do circles. I've since moved on to polygons, which is very exciting. And so you can draw just a block, or you could just draw right around here on a map and basically assign any audio to that. And in addition to the sort of underlying continuous layer of audio, there are two types of sort of what I call momentary audio that can be interspersed within that. They're usually smaller bits, and they are usually pieces of audio that kind of play once. Like you get into the area and then it's triggered, it will play once, and then it'll be done, as opposed to sort of a looping ambient situation. And those can be either curated by the person creating the project, me or whomever is using Ramware, or they can be added using the same app. They can be added by the people who are experiencing the project. So these red ones are to indicate that there's another kind of type of content, which is a dynamic type of content, which happens over time when a particular piece is installed. So if I installed this in DC on January 1st, and the app was released and people could wander around listening to everything, which was the ambient layer, and then these yellow dots, and then they added their own on top of that to respond to various questions that are asked within the app. And depending on what the piece is about, I can ask questions, any question I want. I could look at the clouds and tell me what you think, and then they could do, or tell me what this building reminds you of, or anything at all, and describe the person who just walked past you, or something like that. There are lots of explorations that can be done, but the point is that these red ones are sort of indicative of a co-creation sort of element to what I do, a contributory element, and a way in which I lose control over a lot of what the piece ends up being, which is both exciting and totally nerve-wracking, as I'm sure you can imagine. But it's a crucial part of my work and of what Roundware allows, because again, Roundware was developed obviously to scratch the own itch that my own itch that I had to create the pieces. So I will keep on going. I'm going to kind of crank through some of these, some of the history of where Roundware came from, just relatively quickly, although I'm going to show one video which I think will be useful. So Roundware is actually named because the first project I did with it was called Round. So this was a project for a museum outside of New York called the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, and they asked me to come in and do something that would be some sort of slightly resembling an audio tour, but not be an audio tour, because they really didn't like the general approach of audio tours to sort of tell you what you're supposed to think about the artwork, et cetera, et cetera. And I decided that what I would do was basically create a sort of soundtrack for the museum, so when people are wandering around, they could hear that and then infuse it with comments that people made about the artworks in the museum that would be heard when you were standing in front of that artwork. So you could be standing in front of a painting and you could hear the curator's remarks about the painter, but then about the painting, but then you could also hear a 6-year-old's comments about the painting as well. And the idea of sort of democratizing and making art into something that I feel it should always be, which is that anybody can appreciate it, anybody can like or dislike anything, and you don't need to have a PhD in art history or some kind of critical discourse to have that sort of appreciation. So that's where Roundware came from. The title, the Round is sort of the reason I named it that, which is somewhat useful perhaps to understand, is first of all, King Arthur's Round Table, where everybody sits around a round table and nobody's opinion is sort of more important than others. And then second of all, the notion of a musical round. You guys know what a musical round is? Like row, row, row your boat. And then everybody's singing together, but kind of in an offset way, which I think is somewhat what Roundware enables you to create. So I'm going to hope that this is actually going to play a video. This was a piece that I did at the deCordova Sculpture Garden and Museum out in Lincoln, outside of Boston, and it was one of the first pieces using Roundware, and I think it will give you a little bit of an idea of what Roundware can actually do and what my work is like. So. Escape's piece is, I think of it as a musical composition that is a spatially related musical composition. The volumes of those parts fade up and down depending on how close you are to where the center of that particular musical part is.
Okay, let's walk. The music is changing now.
Yeah, we get these bells more towards the entrance of the museum is more of a this sort of melodic part, a very slow melody. All the music is based on some of the topographic characteristics of the park itself.
I know that voice.
Oh, there's some voices.
There's some voices.
Hey, there goes a chipmunk.
Right where I'm standing, some guy saw a chipmunk.
There goes the chipmunk again.
Which could have been a chipmunk from 2 weeks ago.
Yes, it could have, absolutely, which I think is kind of fun to think about where that chipmunk is right now.
The location is getting what I would call ominous, a little darker, and as I'm standing here, a huge dark cloud is rolling in over the garden, over the trees, and the light's getting darker and dimmer. I don't know how the application is.
I'm standing inside this glass sculpture, and the acoustics are very fun.
Oh, wow. So that guy went and did this. They stuck their head into this open glass dome that's part of the structure, and these are the acoustics he was talking about. And now I'm doing it too.
You might not have done that otherwise.
I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have.
Unique, being recruited into the Israeli army. I'm going to be a soldier. I'm very scared, pretty excited. Being here is pretty peaceful, I guess, compared to what I'm about to go through. Good luck to me.
Oh, wow. Is this raining?
That's rain.
Something must have been here. It's raining.
And they recorded the rain and left it here for us.
It's not raining though right now.
No.
That's pretty cool. So if you want to make your own recording,
Okay, I'm looking at this sculpture. It looks like a piece of like HVAC ductwork from a building, but it kind of twists in a way that reminds me of like a lower intestine. We hit stop.
you hit stop, and then we can listen to it back.
Okay, I'm looking at this sculpture. It looks like a piece of. There I am. Like HVAC ductwork. There were these three elements going on simultaneously. There was the music, there was the rain from God knows when that was recorded, not on a day like today, and then there's me.
From just a few minutes ago.
Looks like a very peaceful garden. The thing I think would help it would be a few of one of those type of fish that are catfish.
So that should give you a little bit of an idea. So that piece started out with just the music and none of the comments, and then people made the comments over time, which, again, that's the other sort of nerve-wracking part of this is when you start and you know the music is written to have comments on top of it, so it's not that interesting until commentary sort of comes in. But you sort of hope for the best and hope that you get kids who like catfish. I don't know. It's a type of fish that are catfish. It's very interesting phrasing, but it was super cute though. So that gives you the basic idea, I think, hopefully, with the retro iPhone and everything. So I'll go through. Actually, I'm going to skip some of these things real quick here. That's not. Okay. Another audio AR piece, Sound Sky. This was a piece I did in Christchurch, New Zealand. This was a piece a number of years ago, they had a huge earthquake in Christchurch, which pretty much destroyed a huge portion of the downtown. So the sort of hope with this piece was to create a piece in the downtown area and let people who are residents go sort of wander through and reminisce about what used to exist in certain places that were unfortunately destroyed, but then also look to the future and and sort of talk about, well, this was this, but now we have an opportunity to rebuild, and this could become this, and the downtown could transform into this new sort of thing. So the idea of having a location-based piece that allowed people to make these comments, to actually create the comments when they're in the sort of emotional space of being there, was extremely important, because I think that really puts you in the right place to make heartfelt, earnest, authentic comments, and then also, obviously, when other people come by to listen to those comments, they exist in the place where the person made them. So there's this connection to the specific landscape, to that specific location on both ends of that experience, which I think is one of the ways that audio AR can be really, really compelling. Certainly not the only, but one of the great ways that you can navigate through a space, listening to something, and not having your phone in front of you the whole time, and get that added layer of content. So another project, Tributaries. This was a project in Newcastle in the UK, which was done for the 100th anniversary of World War I, the end of World War I. Well, sort of the entire, sort of the they were doing a bunch of, the museums over there were doing a bunch of exhibitions on World War I, and they wanted to try to bring back some voices from back then and bring back some of the experiences that people who were alive then went through. Obviously, there's not many recordings from back then, so we kind of had to reproduce some of that, but they did have a lot of text, a lot of diaries, a lot of other, there were weather reports and all that kind of stuff. So there was ways that we could, we got a present day weather person to voice the weather reports from 100 years ago and sort of distribute those throughout the city and kind of create this connection between this historical moment and the present day. And I think, again, audio and audio AR in particular is a great, I think can be very effective at connecting, compressing time, if you will, or connecting different points in time, whether it's yesterday and today. I experienced something in this location now, and somebody will have a new experience in this location tomorrow, and there's sort of a constancy of location, but a breadth of time, I think, can be quite interesting. And whether it's a day, a week, a month, or 100 years, I think there's a lot of ways of kind of jumping into that and doing some exploring. So Tributaries, that was probably the biggest aspect of that project that was new and different for me. So now we'll get a little into behind the scenes stuff. Not too much, but so as I mentioned before, Ramware is a software platform. It is open source. I don't know what, I'm not going to get really hardly at all technical, so I'm sure you guys are, but feel free to ask more technical questions if you have them. But Ramware essentially is a client server. The server sits in the cloud. All the audio is sort of stored up there, database, all that kind of stuff. And then there are various clients that can talk to that server via the Ramware API. This is a somewhat old diagram, so forgive some of the stuff that's a little outdated, but essentially just what I said, database, some software on the server that used to do the audio mixing. The audio mixing has now moved to the clients. But the basic point is that there's a database of audio that is all geotagged, and the clients access that data with the knowledge, of course, of where the client is at any given time, how the client's moving, where, all of that information, and that enables the generation of a dynamic stream of audio that is, unique for any individual. Any client will have a unique stream of audio, whether it's coming from the client or being generated locally, and it all depends on how they're walking around, how fast they're going, in some cases what direction they're looking. I know you guys are fully aware of all the Bose stuff, the frames and whatnot. So that's a sort of high-level architecture on the, this is way more than I want to actually go through. As I mentioned, the mixing is now done on the client side, so just the component parts of the audio stream are downloaded, and then the client does the mixing, which allows me to do less latent activities, such as when you look in a different direction, you don't want to have to wait for the buffering time to have your audio actually change accordingly. So client-side mixing makes a lot more sense and is something that that we've moved to. The iOS framework has moved to that, and as has the web app framework. Android is a little behind. Budgetary problems, you know how it is. Open source projects. When you get somebody, when I get an enthusiastic Roundware developer to participate, then that will catch up, I think. But yeah, so frameworks for iOS, you can put it into any iOS app you want, and it basically just implements the Ramware API, allows for the generation of these streams and the communication with the server. This is a diagram of the playlist. So essentially, at any given time, there's a dynamic playlist that Ramware generates, which determines what of those assets will play back for the person. And the assets are, if you remember the diagram before, that's the small dots, like the small, you could be in a spot where there are 100 assets. You don't want to hear them all at the same time. Obviously, you want to have some kind of capacity for filtering and whatnot. So here's just a sort of high-level view of the filtering that's possible. You have all the assets on the top, and then for a particular project, then you can filter them by tags. There's basically, it's sort of very simple metadata kind of tags that are grouped by categories. Which question are you responding to? Are you an adult or a child? If you might want to if you care about that. What's your favorite color? I mean, it could be anything. And then there are location-based filters, based on where you're located, based on how frequently, whether you heard the asset recently, and if it's been blocked for some reason, then there's ordering and prioritization, all that kind of stuff. So again, I don't want to go into huge detail because we don't have a ton of time, but it's important, obviously, to be able to filter content, to be able to create the kind of experiences that you want. And some of this content filtering is sort of automatic, and others are, can be exposed to the user based on what you want. So in some cases, I might want people to be able to say, I want to hear only comments that museum visitors have made versus curatorial comments. In other cases, I might want to enforce that those are mixed with each other to make some kind of point, for example. So here's a few other types of, these are kind of different listening modes, if you will, that Ramware supports. The traditional mode is, when you're within the range of a particular asset, it becomes part of the playlist. So right here, these three are in range. They're either circles, or you can have a polygon for assets as well. That's pretty straightforward. Whatever you're close to, you can hear. The global listen just makes everything available, no matter where you are. That can be very effective at times for certain types of projects, or at certain times within the experience of a project, you could switch to global mode and then switch back if you wanted. Range listening allows for you to create some different sort of approaches of listening to stuff that's at different distances from you. So there's a minimum and a maximum distance, and I've done some experimentation with, lift your phone up, and it sort of lets you listen to stuff that's farther away from you, and you point it downwards, it brings the stuff closer. So again, that's a way that you can determine what content you're listening to, and that's useful if you create projects that don't have content everywhere and you want people to still be able to listen. They can just expand their range. And then directional listening, again, this is what those frames do, but also the IMU in your phone does. So if you take your phone when you're listening to the app and you just move it around, you can give yourself a certain arc and listen to the content that, in this case, these three guys would be available. You can combine these in different ways. You can use the distance, minimum and maximum distance with the range. You can combine these sort of approaches in different ways. So I'm not going to demo the web admin because I don't think that's very exciting, but I'm happy to answer questions about that. We're coming up on 4:30 here, so I thought it would probably be better for you guys to have me stop blabbing a lot and perhaps dive into what is most interesting to you guys, hopefully something, and we can go from there. Is that cool? Does that work for you guys? I can certainly talk about more projects, but I'd love to hear what questions you guys have, and I can certainly demonstrate stuff as well if you want. Questions? Comments? There's got to be something. There's got to be.
One of our first game ideas that we haven't ended up pursuing was actually Gwen's idea, but was this like murder mystery where you have to go to different locations to get different clues, to hear different clues.
Right.
The idea was like you'd go back in time and hear something relevant to whatever case you're trying to solve, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah,
that sounds like it would be an application of.
Oh, totally. Yeah, no, I love that idea. I think that the time traveling thing is, as I was mentioning before, I think that can be really helpful. Both, you can create sounds. You could have a horse and buggy driving by or whatever. You could have like period type sounds going if you wanted to sort of really make somebody feel like they've gone back in time. But then you can also.
That for each user, so each user can be doing a different story or something.
Yes, that would probably be a set of tags. You would assign different tags to different stories. You could have story A, story B, story C, and people would choose which order could be assigned one of those three, and then that would segment the content based on what they wanted. But yes, going to a particular location, sort of gathering more information or something like that for the murder mystery is definitely something that Ramware could do. It's actually funny. Actually, that Scapes piece, the Scapes piece that I showed the video of, people started making up their own sort of games with it, and one person sort of did kind of what you're saying. It wasn't a murder mystery by any stretch, but they went to sort of a random place and said, go to the corner of the parking lot to receive further instructions or something like that. And then they went over there, and then they proceeded to talk about the further instruction, and then they, and it was kind of a game within the piece, which was, I didn't have anything to do with that. It was somebody taking their own initiative to sort of figure that out, which I thought was great. A whole bunch of kids talked about zombies and stuff. They were like, I'm hiding beneath this sculpture. The zombies are coming. And then this story of zombies actually continued over months, and with different people, like different, like all the zombie fans kind of came together, and there was this one area of the sculpture park that kind of turned into Zombieland, and then at the end, you'll be very glad to know the helicopters came and landed, and everybody was saved, so nobody died. But obviously the zombies are sort of, I don't know what they are. I'm not going to make a comment. I'm not going to come down one side of that argument, but it's one of those things where when you open up your work to this kind of potential interaction with it, you sometimes get really, really neat kind of takes on it that I certainly didn't think to create some kind of zombie scenario, but it's wonderful, and it kind of adds to the, to me, it adds to the excitement of sort of creating these pieces. I am, my work is very, I guess maybe it's a fear of ever having something be done, but there's something about knowing that things can be sent out into the world and kind of take on their own life, if you will, much like a zombie. No, and kind of get this level of creativity or level of input that I couldn't do on my own. I really get tons of inspiration from people who come in and do stuff. So yeah, I think that idea is certainly one that would be well suited for Roundware. I have dreams of Roundware becoming a SaaS at some point. It is not yet. It is kind of requires a little more technical involvement to set up the server and then get the client talking to the server. It's not, all the code is there. It's just a matter of kind of going through those steps. There's a demo Roundware app that can be used for sort of testing stuff, which is pretty handy if you just want to go out and make recordings in certain locations and then sort of see how it works. That can be done. That's the iOS version is a good place to do that. But I think that idea would definitely be, Roundware could certainly help at least get the basics going on that.
Question.
Yes.
You showed a little bit of the Scape's user interface,
Mm-hmm.
or the end user, where you can record it and just pretty much just drop a sound that has some radius. But then you also showed all this other capacity of direction and like minimum, maximum radius. It's like how much of that do you see being useful to expose to kind of like the most fundamental participant, the most typical participant? Right?
Yeah.
And how much of it is just like too complex and maybe is off-putting?
Yeah, to date, I've exposed very little of it, and that's a really good question. It is something I think a lot about because I do want it to remain simple for the end user. That's why, there's like two buttons. It's listen or speak, and that's kind of, obviously within speak, there's a few steps that you need to do to what question do you want to respond to and whatnot, but it's fairly straightforward in that regard, and exposing more does cause some problems sometimes. So I've experimented a little bit with adding additional filtering capacity, but having it sort of semi-hidden, not really hidden, but like it isn't, it's like behind a button instead of, you hit a button, then you open up, oh, here are some filters I can do. And the filters have a default state, which is basically listen to everything. And then you can kind of specify from there, become a super user of sorts if you want.
So this is the user choosing their listening experience based on eliminating things that they don't want to hear.
In this case, yes. I like to start with the broad set. If you start with nothing, then people are going to get confused because they won't, So kind of starting broad and then narrowing down. As far as the other sort of listening modes and everything goes, that's more of a kind of, set up the project that way, one way or the other, and if you're seeding the project with a certain amount of content, some, like the skates piece was seeded with basically no content. I allowed people to come in and do whatever they wanted. The tributaries piece, I created a lot of content myself and I put it out there, the weather reports and diary entries and, machinist shop logs, stuff like that was historical material. I could create that and then I could place that where I wanted and I could create the shapes and I could do anything like that. The thing that I think, actually the scenario in which I think exposing more to an end user that would be most appropriate would be something that I'm working on now, which is enabling the app to be to be a different type of creation tool. So the person creating the experience would be able to go and say, create a recording and then walk around a closed polygon that they want that recording to exist in, for example, and do sort of other manipulations, be able to move stuff around, to be able to adjust. So you're really in the actual physical location that the piece is going to be experienced when you're creating it, because I think that's a far cry from sitting at your computer at a Google map and drawing something like, I think this is where it is, but I'm not really sure, and I don't really know if this is going to work. So you do that. I always find myself doing that and then going out and listening and then going back in and then going. And it's like this back and forth can be very frustrating. So I think the exposure of more in-depth sort of, I don't know if you want to call them editing tools or just sort of experience modifying tools, I think makes more sense for sort of more of the creator side of things. Of course, end users are creators to a certain extent because they're adding their own, or they have the option of adding their own content. But it's a good question because I think it's a constant balance. And maybe when people get more familiar with the overall idea of audio AR, then we'll be able to push a little farther in that direction. But right now, my experience has been that people, when explaining it to them, it was wonderful when Pokemon Go came out for me because I could, even though this really isn't Pokemon Go, there is an element of, hey, it's like Pokemon Go, except instead of finding Pokemon, you're going around and you're finding little pieces of audio, and those are playing, and it's and you can add Pokemon. You can't spawn your own Pokemon really at this point. So, but that was a nice thing to sort of give me a context within which to talk about this stuff, despite the obvious differences. But perhaps when AR generally and maybe audio AR gets to the point where everybody kind of understands that it exists and there are possibilities on a base level, then we'll be able to push things farther. But yeah, I think there's a ton of stuff with the directional, and that's why the Bose IMU enabled headphones or frames, and I know that there are other manufacturers doing stuff as well, and I think that's going to be really exciting for sure. Or AirPods, or I think they've got IMUs or some semi-IMU. The new AirPod Pros have something. They certainly have an accelerometer in them, so I don't know.
Well, yes, right, because you can tap them.
Yeah, because you could tap them, and I don't know what they're going to, what kind of APIs are going to open up on that, but it seems like people are thinking about that stuff. Wearables, hearables, I don't know if I'm too into that phrase, but it seems to be what people are using somewhat now. But yeah, for me, the more hardware that companies put out that I can experiment with, the better. It's great, because I certainly can't build hardware on my, I tried strapping an IMU to my, it's a major failure. But I'm not really a hardware guy. So more questions, more comments, more things you would like me to show. I can go to a...
Just a tech question. What is the precision where you delineate where the sound will play? Yeah. How exact is it?
Well, Ramware is what I would call location determinate. It's agnostic to where it gets its location information from. Okay. So you note I showed you mainly outdoor projects because we all know the problems with GPS indoors. We also know that GPS is the only sort of ubiquitous location, essentially free location technology that exists right now. So we have GPS error bars right now, which inside a building are way too big to make it useful. I have done a lot of experimentation with other interior systems, whether they be beacon based or magnetic field based or visual positioning systems. But at the end of the day, Ramware just takes, at this point, Ramware just takes 2 coordinates. Ramware doesn't have a z-axis
Right.
at this point. But adding that isn't a huge leap. But I haven't bothered to add it. There's no point until I can get something that actually gives me useful Z data to actually base something on. But it would be super cool if, you get UWB systems, which are like ultra wideband. It's like you can get like millimeter level, and then you could like raise your phone up, and you could stand up and sit down and get whole new levels of ambient sound. I mean, it could be totally amazing. But unfortunately, Roundware depends on the systems that are built by large companies and governments that I don't have any control over, sadly.
But your experience with implementing this museum park walk or art exhibit, did it feel like it connected spatially and conceptually? So it felt very connected in the demo.
Yeah.
Oh, he must have been talking about this particular thing. But was that the experience when you implemented it as well? That people really can see what object they're talking about, or does it get sort of pop up in the wrong place sometimes?
It would be unfair of me to say that it was always fine, because it certainly wasn't. Sometimes GPS gets wacky, and of course the error bars get multiplied because you make a recording and there's an error bar associated with that, and then you're listening to the recording, there's another error bar associated. Sometimes those can destructively interact, which is great. Other times not. So certainly there are times when weird stuff happens. I think generally, I was pretty aware of what the error bars were when I was creating the experience. So I sort of could set things up to a certain extent, understanding that and kind of guiding the experience such that it would work relatively well with that. Then I will also say that as an artist, I kind of have it a little bit easier because people are a little more willing to be, with aesthetic experiences that are a little more willing to be sort of forgiving about stuff like that. So if you're talking about something that is maybe over there, you'd be like, oh, well, the artist wanted me to walk over there. And, if you're in a generous kind of interpretive mode, that can work. I also I will say that a lot of times little GPS hiccups can actually be really interesting, because if you're walking by and somebody's like, this happened to me in the Scapes project, just to use that as an example. I was walking by and somebody was like, I'm standing inside this ring of trees and I'm looking up towards the sky, and it reminds me of my grandfather's house up in Maine, where I had this similar situation. I was like, I'm not in a ring of trees right now, I'm just walking out in this field. So it made me look around, and I was like, oh, 30 feet that direction was in fact something that looked like a ring of trees, and it got me to go into it. So I think there is something really nice about sort of this audio AR generally being able to kind of pull you in different directions, or guide you, or encourage, or whatever word you want, but to get you to explore a little more by kind of giving you information that is pertinent to a spot when you're not quite at that spot yet, for example. And I know that might seem like an excuse for GPS errors, but sometimes they can be nice. Of course, sometimes they can be inappropriate and bad, but that's when you open yourself up to, you got to open yourself up to the goods and the bads. But yeah, I'm just super excited for the day when interior positioning is accurate enough to really do something where you can place sound objects, walk around them, and understand, have them feel like they've been spatialized, and really kind of get a much more true to reality kind of experience. But you guys probably know more about how close we are to that than I do. But from where I sit, exciting stuff is happening, but it's still, the big guys are all working on it, right? Amazon, spatial computing is like, everybody wants their spatial engine, and Amazon is doing their thing, and Niantic, of course, is well into it. Magic Leap has got the whatever, I don't know, all the magic verse, is that what they call it?
I never know what magic
Neither do I, but it seems like they're spending a lot of money and they got good people doing stuff. So Yes, well, they got Neil Stevenson doing stuff, so I mean, they got some content possibility. So, so yeah, I mean, it's super exciting, but we're definitely dependent on the systems that are out of my control, out of most people's control. But I think if you work within those constraints, you can still create some pretty cool stuff. So, other questions? Yes.
For my project, I wanted to make something that people could like potentially contribute poetry to like a location. So I think this might be really helpful with that.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, poetry. That I think poetry can have some wonderful. Obviously, a lot of the language can be very sort of physically related. You could put you in a place, and it would be nice to actually be in that place too. Yeah, I did a piece. It's no longer available because of the inexorable progress of new iOS versions and whatnot. But I did a piece in Harvard Yard that used as the source material. It used used a bunch of audio that the Woodbury Poetry Room at Harvard had. They've had a poetry series for like 100 years of poets coming in and reading their works. So they had recordings of like Robert Frost and William Carlos Williams and Ezra Pound. I mean, people like really old, amazing recordings of these actual poets reading their work. And then they have more contemporary poets as well. And I took those and I kind of sliced them up line by line and then distributed them around in different places. So I had like all the first lines of the poem in a certain area. So if you went to this area, you could hear first line after first line after first line, then you could go somewhere else and hear all the last lines. And it made it very abstract, and the poets probably would be very upset with me if they found out about this. But it was a remixing of that, and a spatial remixing, which was pretty fun to do. But I love your idea. So were you thinking of having people read their own poetry or something along those lines? So write a poem that related to a certain location and then go to that location and kind of recite it, sort of thing? Or I could imagine, if you want to share any more thoughts.
I was thinking of like while they're in the location.
Yeah.
Like creating a poem there.
Oh, like almost like improv or something like on this. Oh yeah, that could be really great. Yeah. So yeah, the question would be, I mean, in a Ramware context, that would be, open the app, press speak, recite it, make up a poem right now, and then you just press record and you record it and then upload it to the cloud, and then whenever somebody else came by, they could hear that, and then you'd have the ability, of course, as an administrator in that case, to listen and move the recording or make the area bigger or those sorts of things if you were to want to do that. But that could be a wonderful way of kind of, it'd be a nice way to traverse a city, right? You kind of wander through a city and you hear residents improvised poetry at crosswalks or wherever. That's a cool idea.
And you had a lot of you've been working a lot on prompts, right?
Yeah.
So like things
Oh,
to
cool.
sort of like get people who may not necessarily be able to compose a whole poem on the fly to be able to start thinking about it.
That's really smart to think about that, because that's really hard. Like, even if, poetry is like particularly hard, but even for me, being like, to say anything is sometimes hard. So I always think about what questions I ask, and I usually have some question that's like so broad that it's, that anybody could do it. Like, just tell a story about your day. I don't know, look at the ground and tell me what it reminds you. I don't know, I'm just sorry, I'm making up bad examples right now, but something that's very broad literally it could just be share something, say something. And then as I go down the list, I sort of get into more details, because I find that some people freak out when they have a super broad question. They're like, what do you mean something? What does that mean? What does say something? They are like much happier being like given instructions, like look at a tree near you and describe it. Then they're like, okay, I can do that. There's a tree. Record. The tree is quite tall and it's got lots of branches and the leaves right now are green, but they're starting to turn yellow. That some people are much more comfortable with that. So in a poetry context, that could be really interesting. Like, what are some prompts that you've come up with thus far that because that's a big, that's a challenge.
Yeah, like right now, I've just been thinking about like sound. So, it wasn't necessarily like a poem about sound, but it asked like, what sounds can you hear right now, and like what can you relate them to? And for like one test, I asked them to write a poem about a different subject, based on the sounds they heard. Like
You
a
mean
memory or something.
like a poem about sound that isn't about what that sound is actually, like what it reminds you? Is that what you're saying? Sorry, I'm okay.
Like the theme is not necessarily the sound itself.
Right.
Yeah.
So what it reminds you of, or what it, maybe points towards, or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great to use sound as a poetry is such a, in my mind, poetry is meant to be read. It's meant to be, it's got all the rhythms and everything really come out when it gets into the audio from just the written page. I mean, the written page can be really interesting too, but it's, but it's hard. It's hard to just make up a poem, and it must rhyme. Yes, don't. Yeah,
I think that one's not so strict on your version, like a little bit more freebase.
Yes, that's good. That's good. Yes, free form is. I'm always impressed with like free form, like rap battles and stuff like that. People obviously Eminem is like the 8 Mile thing. It's just like, oh my gosh, how do they come up with this stuff? And I know a lot of it is. I know there are strategies and techniques that kind of make it more doable, but it's. My brain doesn't work that way. I can't just. Although it sounds like it right now that I can just talk forever, but I don't always, not always able to.
You write for audio SDKs.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Oh, that reminds me. I should also mention that I have started a new website called audioar.org, which.
Your blog post.
Oh, great. So there's the site is in its infancy right now. I've started it with a couple colleagues, a couple journalists, and Fran, who came here a few months ago, Fran Panetta, a month ago, to talk to you guys. British, probably remember, because her very perfect British accent, which is, so she's been doing audio AR stuff, obviously, as you know, for a while too. So we started this site just to kind of try to collect different practitioners in the area and it felt like something was starting. Companies, obviously, Bose and Amazon and Apple and others are getting interested, and we thought it would be a nice place to sort of let practitioners and technologists and academics and other people kind of share their experiences, things that worked, things that didn't work, and just sort of give and let people know when projects are happening and whatnot. So we're kind of ramping up on that, and Philip has agreed to be interviewed for that at some point whenever I get myself in gear. I promise I will, and I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I know you're like, please forget. No. But yeah, any projects you guys do, and we'd love to think about getting stuff up there, because I do think it's I think this class is evidence of the fact that it is becoming a real thing, which is really exciting. So I'm super excited to hear to experience what you guys choose to do with the with the class. Is a project sort of the deliverable for the class? Is that
right? So
yes.
There will be a presentation. We need to discuss that before you leave when it's going to happen, because there are possible changes there. But there will be a presentation at the end of the class. Francesca will hopefully attend. Some people from both will attend. If you can come, that would
cool.
be great.
Yeah, keep me posted.
Otherwise, we'll spend the next 2 weeks thinking through how to disseminate our insights from the class.
Yeah.
So there will be something online, I dare say, but we will try to decide that together exactly what form it will take.
Great.
So there will be something, we will leave a trace.
Well, to the extent possible, we'd love to amplify that message on audiohour.org if it's possible. But we can obviously talk about that. But yeah. So if you guys have any ideas about things to include or practitioners or whatever, please feel free to reach out because we are super open and want to learn from each other.
So we're running out of time, but
Sure.
I'm very curious about one aspect of the system. Is it dynamic in any way that people who make contribution could actually change parameters or aspects of the experience for other people beyond just the sound trace they leave? So an example would be like if there's a lot of people leaving I don't know why I decided to call them sound traces, but
Sure.
if a lot of people leave sound traces in the same location, can the system detect that and decide to play sort of a more multi-layered ambient soundtrack in that area or something? Is there some way of being aware of what's being inputted to the system?
That's a really interesting area to think about. I think that the simple answer right now is no, in the sense that Ramware doesn't. Ramware, you can choose how many simultaneous voices can play, and therefore, if you say, well, 3 simultaneous voices can play, if 3 are available, then in that sense, if there's a location where people add more, then that will be a location where potentially 3 will, most likely, if there's 100 in this spot, you'll probably have 3 playing all together at any given time. That's not the music layer or whatever, that's just so, whereas if you have a spot that only has 1 available, even though 3 could potentially play at the same time, only 1 will ever actually play because there's only 1 available. So that's a very, very rudimentary aspect of what you're talking about, and that's the only sort of, at least if I'm understanding you correctly, that's the only thing that Roundware sort of does currently. But I love this idea. I hadn't thought about this. I love this idea of more activity, kind of the heat map heats up and something changes with.
We're always going to think about this as, is there a way I can program this as a participant? Because we're MIT. So even there might be a way, even if you don't know it, of injecting code some weird way by
who knows?
Overloading the database or something. But it's just, I think there's some potential there somewhere in it could be very advanced, like the words you say could actually be understood by the system and it could change things. But
I've been.
Then you're halfway to the matrix.
I don't know. It's super. I've been thinking about the first step to that obviously is sort of getting some kind of accurate translation or transcription service automated so that and then you could get to the point where you could search for only play me commentary that uses the word love, and then you could walk around and get this whole experience with just and then you do sentiment analysis, and then it's like only give me the comments that feel love even though they don't say love but they feel it. So I think those are super exciting areas to look into.
I just want to know what the zombie people would do with something like that. Where they can sort of affect the system itself.
Or the zombies themselves.
Exactly.
This is very, very, very important. But no, I love that idea, and so it's open source.
Right.
Go for it.
We're out of time. I think this was really helpful. Actually, we have one team who are out today because of medical emergencies that are basically doing the kind of Pokemon Go music.
Oh, cool.
So we'll definitely have them look at your system, and they I would guess will want to use it.
Well, feel free to reach out. I can, again, depending on the level of technical skill and time involved or time available, it's, I can recommend different approaches to things. But all the code is there. The server's written in Python using Django. Obviously, iOS is Swift, and the web stuff is very nascent right now, but it is, it's all, JavaScript, sort of modern day JavaScript stuff. So to the extent, yes?
I know where I'm at. But is there a way to procedurally generate a location? for a sound bite, or is it totally tied?
Can you describe what scenario you would, what input would you be taking to?
So Pokemon Go, so this has to do with the Pokemon Go, but
Sure.
like audio music project that Chuck is doing. Chuck and Therese, yeah. Chuck and Therese are doing. So in Pokemon Go, you walk around, Pokemon like spawn, can audio also spawn?
Probability.
Based on like a probability.
Yeah, that is, I mean, that would be the kind of thing that would be a relatively small modification for a particular project. I haven't done that. The other thing that I haven't done that I'm very excited about is that is moving after their spawn, then they move. You assign a path and a time, whatever, and they loop around, or so then you can just sit in one place and you can let stuff flow over you, or you can move around, and there's this sort of double interaction in that sense. Well, it's a single interaction, but you know what I mean, double motion. So that is also really that kind of dynamism, I think, is very exciting. But yeah, I like the idea of spawning, sort of popping up based on maybe your previous experience within the app or something like that. But yeah, I think the framework is there that you can, I've been just adding stuff as we go, semi-organic code base in that sense, which is sometimes problematic, but it's fairly clean. So check it out. If you know Python, you can jump in and have a look. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.